In a minute, I'm going to try to give you kind of, I guess, a satellite photo, a little bit of an overview of what's going on the internet. The Simon Wiesenthal Center's Digital Terrorism and Hate Project now has been going on now it's in its 14th year. Back in 1995, there was one hate site, stormfront.org. By the way, it's still there, and then some. We're looking at, as only one organization, at far more than 14,000 such problematic sites, and the exponential growth by way of the viral nature of the social networking makes the numbering game maybe even irrelevant. Our focus today increasingly is on social networking as an incubator, validator, and motivator of pre-genocidal hate against Israel and the Jewish people. We have a very high-powered panel and audience this morning, so anyone who has any seichel will say his most important piece first before we get to the details. And the lessons, I think, are clear, if not easy, to execute. And they're not in the PowerPoint. First is to make sure that the providers of these services, like Facebook and Google and YouTube, are also part of the equation of being held accountable. We can't allow the end user alone, in most cases, some teenagers, to be responsible for the content or the interaction with it. And it is certainly coming from the United States, where we are, our first, not just 11th commandment, is the First Amendment of free speech. When we deal with companies like Facebook and Google and YouTube, they are not operating initially from the free speech principle, but rather a contract with their user. You have to follow their rules. And therefore, if I may come all the way to the end to not preempt, but to give an embrace to JCPA's effort to come up with a draft resolution, this process alone is an important tool in pressuring the Facebooks and YouTubes. Now, in a few seconds, I'm going to run through a few dozen slides, and you're probably going to say, I think, oy vey, look at all that horrible stuff on Facebook. So let me say to you, for the record, that Facebook has removed thousands of Facebook pages that we've identified to them. And the fact that you see so many more there, and for give you one example, you know about the Saudi prince who's now offered, what is it, 100,000, now it's up to 1 million, to kidnap an Israeli soldier. So we went to Facebook. We speak there and to them all the time. And they said, the guy's got a Facebook page. What did they do? They removed the bad content. But he's still there to operate. So we would actually give Facebook a B+ for their cooperation in this arena. And I know that there are representatives of NGOs, good human rights activists as well, who are here, Jewish defense agencies, engaging all of the social network providers with accurate information and pressuring them is a useful thing, although it's certainly not going to end the problem. The second, I think, call to action for all of us is that the Jewish world needs to begin a coordinated effort to engage the online masses. Dr. Ganor mentioned just briefly the Arab Spring, which is a whole nother conference or set of conferences. But certainly, we need to try to get into the game. And to date, we have barely registered a blip. This, too, is not going to be a very easy undertaking. I will share with you that a few years ago, we created a website in 5 languages, very modest, called askmusa.org. It's still there. And it's basically a modest attempt to introduce Judaism, Jewish values to Muslims, sort of Judaism 101 for Muslims. We absolutely failed to get any coverage in the Arab or Muslim media. And that was not for lack of trying. In fact, I did have an interview, a long one, with a brilliant young reporter from Al Arabiya in Washington, D.C. We went through the whole site. She had a cameraman there. Here was her last question. Rabbi, this is all very impressive, and please don't be insulted, but the question I'm going to ask you is the question that would be on the lips of everyone watching this report when it goes on TV. Why are you doing this? What's the real reason behind askmusa.org? Is it a conspiracy? So finally I said to her, yes, it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy of truth, because we can't figure out anything else to try to it. Needless to say, that interview never reached the air. And to date, unfortunately, as the Director General of Israel Broadcasting Authority can tell you, there are hundreds of channels out there. If they don't like what you see, you just change the channel. On the internet, Facebook, social networking, no one can force the other side to look. So it's going to take, if you will, a Jewish village to begin to use some of its dynamics and seichel to try to reach out and communicate to the Arab and Muslim masses. Because what you see in terms of what it is they're being fed with on a daily basis is should be deeply concerning to everyone. So I'm going to switch now to a PowerPoint. As far as the folks up on the stage, they're welcome to sit, but if they want to see the slides, they probably should go in the audience. As I mentioned, we've been doing this now for over a decade. Before I even had a computer, I still feel like many of you in the audience, kind of like a monkey, you know, give the instructions, push a button, go up there, use this. But the picture, the overall picture of what we're up against, I think, is emerging quite clearly. And if I'm showing you a few dozen slides, we can be easily showing you hundreds or more. The last slide, by the way, will give you an online address. If you wish to download this Facebook presentation, you can go do so, do your own research. If you have any questions or comments, you can throw us an email and we'll get the right person at the Wiesenthal Center to respond. So for starters, let's look at the other face of Facebook, YouTube, etc. So some of you here may recall that trying to ride the coattails of the online revolution, the social networking, the Arab Spring, was the call for a May 15th launch of the Spring Intifada. So if you look on here, this is a YouTube, and it says it's the third Palestinian official promo. And I'm not going to really go into huge detail on any of these images. The audience itself is expert, and I think I'd rather use the maximum amount of time for you to see it and to look for questions and discussion. This pullout is interesting. Of course, it has not just Har HaBayit, but also Marat HaMachpelah and the Arab horse and a rider. This is part of the campaign to remove Israeli embassies, Facebook-driven or facilitated. Here's a YouTube of the protesters removing the Israeli flag from our embassy Israel's embassy in Cairo. Now, I pulled up this image, and I want you, some of you may know Carlos Latouf, but if you don't, you should know the name. He's actually been around for a while, a vicious anti-Semite and hater of Israel, a brilliant cartoonist. And he's been around and attacking Israel, I think going back to the time of the invasion of Lebanon, couple of more visuals in case you forgot. These are all his. This goes all the way back to 2006. A perfect example of someone who is known to people who follow these issues. His cartoons got some notoriety, then he got more notoriety out of Tehran, and now with the internet, he's right in the thick of things. Means that 10 years ago, this was a very talented anti-Semite speaking to a limited audience out of Brazil. Now he's an international player. Actually, I don't know if Prime Minister Netanyahu will be that upset with this image. He looks in pretty good shape. If you don't have a sense of humor, you can mamish go crazy. Okay, and now Facebook is now being used to promote the global march to Jerusalem for March 2012. If you don't know anything about it, you may want to put this on your radar screen. And very interesting, this is the Global March towards Jerusalem, one of their websites. Interesting airbrush of the Jerusalem Old City skyline, sort of like Mahmoud Abbas's speech at the UN the other week. Can't seem to find anything Jewish in there. But you see that talking about useful idiots, if you look at the reference to the bottom, this one is not talking about violence, but invoking Gandhi, nonviolent movement. Let's go together, hundreds of thousands of people and change reality on the ground. And of course, backing this nonviolent movement is none other than Al-Manar. That has also embraced the global march to Jerusalem. This is another perfect example of Facebook and the social networking. Using what's called a wall. You put something out there, other people who are so inclined will put it up on their page, and it can be, of course, in multiple languages, so you see in French and Spanish. I just decided, together with our researchers, to pull this down. Of course, we all know about the ongoing plot to create the Greater Israel. It's been around a long time. Very nice map. Take a look at it. This is NWO, very high quality website. But I want to trace it for you about how things operate today on the internet. Here it is coming into play by a blogger. Same visual, same story. Here it's repeated on the Northern Truth Seekers. And we decided, okay, after a while, let's take a look at Google. 75,000 results from one posting. So the next time, we'll be coming out in late February with next year's report. What number should we pick out of the sky to say how many sites? The whole issue of how many websites and blogs, that question now is almost irrelevant with the viral nature of this stuff. Here we go with the big lie, courtesy of the YouTube, Protocols of Zion. Take a look at who their subscribers are on the lower right-hand side. Some Iranians, some Nazis, classic Jew haters. Just to show also that I have learned, after being assigned to work at the Museum of Tolerance all these years, I even make mention of the World Jewish Congress at this presentation. Don't want to leave them out. They are highlighted on this Facebook page. And of course, the Rotaries are controlled by the World Jewish Congress. 9/11. And in case you didn't know, Tel Aviv, of course, was the location from which the battle, the decision and the execution of the war against Gaddafi was, of course, coordinated from here. And where does it trace back to? Where is, as we say, the makor, the ra'aya? Where's the proof for all of this? YouTube. And what YouTube? It brings us back here, meaning to my neck of the woods in the United States, called Real Zionist News. So you see a Middle East presentation and a blogger invoking a great source called Real Zionist News, and so happens this guy is a convert to Christianity and a brother of the guy who runs Real Zionist News. I'm going to probably not run this if I can avoid it. And here we have a site from Pakistan. By the way, I think that's a part of the world, and digitally speaking, we're pretty much running blind. And it would be a good idea if we started paying attention as to what was going on online in Pakistan. Right? There was a study done recently. Facebook is the #1 method of communication between people in Pakistan. It's probably a treasure trove of information for us, awaiting us. And there you will learn on this particular site that American Zionists are plotting the attack on Pakistan, and Hindu Zionists were the ones who carried out the Mumbai attacks. Here are some more. This is all Facebook. And again, Dr. Kanor mentioned before the broad strokes. Here are some of the basic talking points that you will see over and over and over again. And worthwhile for those of us. You have Izzy Liebler and other activists here, who write the op-eds and counter these talking points. They're constantly being changed and updated, and it's a good place as any to find out what the enemy is saying and what is the nature of the brainwashing of their audience. Okay. I'm sure many of you know about Kill a Jew Day. The stuff I'm showing you now has all been removed from Facebook. Turkish. Malaysia. Farrasan. And then let's not forget that Facebook and social networking, whenever they're given the opportunity, will use that dynamic for direct recruitment. And training. And fundraising. I mentioned D- for YouTube, and that's primarily because they're not responsive at all. Anyone of any age who's sitting at home, not necessarily in a country like Israel where most people go to the military and get training, but if you want to learn how to convert any cell phone into a trigger for an explosive, there are scores of YouTube presentations on these areas. Just show you 3 or 4. A slander against Israel. And how do you like to use this for your desktop interface? Swords of Jihad in its 4th edition, wildly popular. And again, you look at it and you shrug your shoulders and say, big deal. But it contributes to an online culture that is potentially quite devastating. BDS, again, we'll make it very, very quick, just to give you a sampling. We had mentioned already of Adala. The use of Twitter, which Memory just had an important posting, I think, a few days ago, on how Twitter is used directly by terrorist groups, and the occupation. And to see, just by following this particular trend, where the Boycott Israel campaign, in some cases, where it lands up There he is, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the great moderate, who is for, as you know, women's participation in local elections in the Arab world, and wrote one of the early fatwas saying that Palestinian women who wanted to become suicide bombers did not have to ask their husband's permission in advance. This is the US campaign, more Facebook, YouTube, and David Duke, who's still around, using the internet, and always finding the most amazing allies in the most amazing places. David Duke basically made his core constituency hate Jews, hate blacks, by the way, hate Arabs. So he's kissed and made up. He's now the darling, comes to the Gulf states a lot to lecture. And just a few days ago, he interviewed a woman in Los Angeles who has been participating in Occupy LA, an African-American lady you may see online, who's talking about getting rid of the Zionist bankers from the United States. So he decided to make peace and is now promoting his interview with an African-American woman because they share their hatred for Jews. The economic implications down the line for kosher products. Okay, and again, real briefly, two more arenas. Denying the Jewish people's claim to the land of Israel. Again, for this audience, won't see very much that's new, but this is a growing part of the subculture. Arab news. So these are some of the talking points that you'll find from some of the Palestinian and other enemies of Israel who are trying to erase 4,000 years of Jewish history. As we speak, my boss and colleague, Rabbi Marvin Heyer, is in Paris meeting with the Director General of UNESCO. We're not particularly, how should I say, we're not looking to her to protect our interests, considering that UNESCO has already rebranded Kever Rachel, and the Rambam would be interested to know that he really is a Muslim. Those were two recent decisions taken at UNESCO. But again, these are important talking points, Dama Lahashiv, and how to respond to them. Some are overtly racist, and as we'll see in a while, some of them are a bit more sophisticated. Here's a classic. 13th centuries, Palestine was completely Arab with no traces of Jewishness. Refuting, this is Islam Web, refuting moderate address, 5 languages, and their own rules of engagement, adopts a balanced and moderate view devoid of bias and extremism, except when it comes to Israel. Facebook. Here you have a blog in Indonesia. And I didn't want to leave out Shlomo Sand. But this is not a posting on an Arab or Muslim site, but on a site that doesn't particularly like any religion. And his shtick that there is no Jewish people, and we have no claim to Palestine, and obviously doesn't like reading any DNA reports. So, but his views are well known, but they will receive a greater platform and echo by way of the internet. And here, in Electronic Intifada, Dr. Edward Said lives on. And it's interesting because he has the most sophisticated, if you will, undermining of our rights in Eretz Yisrael by not denying them. He says there are multiple claims to the land. And I imagine that as the Palestinian state effort inevitably fails, we're going to be coming back again to the one-state solution. So Chazal warned us not to make any predictions, not to try to be prophets. So how to make a prediction. Edward Said's quotes will soon be back in vogue. Okay, let me fast forward really quickly here. You may have heard of the Palestinian ambassador in Ottawa who was politely asked to leave her post because of Twitter posting, which you can read right there. That was just a week ago. Old images, new presentation. The Russian neo-Nazi movement just had its latest march, I think in Red Square the other day. This is on Flickr, Shoah denial, insult to Elie Wiesel and all survivors. This is interesting. This is on Scribd, the Treblinka hoax that somehow finds its way onto an address called Muslim and Suffer, which eventually brings to a non-existent reward to prove that anyone died at Treblinka. Most of you will recognize this as the online version of the latest attack by the Iranians on Shoah denial, some of the best of their worst Shoah cartoons. I'll just run through some of the worst of them really quickly. And if you would pause just to look at the upper left-hand corner of each page, right? There was no Holocaust, and inside the Star of David is a swastika. So if there are Nazis, it's Israel and the Jews who are Nazis. Just disgusting. And then the quasi-terrorist threats against Jews in various countries. The list of Italian Jews. This is a US site, Jew list, right next to the protocols. This is from Texas. This is a tshuva, a hukum on what someone online was asked, what should they do when they saw that the Prophet Muhammad was insulted by a certain newspaper? Should they write, and what's the right address? And his answer was, what do you mean write? You should kill them. That's the tshuva there. Jews Without Borders. And this is based in Australia, got a lot of coverage here, but this is a reminder also of the marketing power of symbols and hate online. And finally, for those, I think, younger folks here involved in Second Life on the internet, Baruch Hashem, even in the Second Life, which doesn't really exist, there are anti-Israel protests. And I travel to Japan quite often, don't pretend to understand everyone there, but even there, the notion of conspiracy is always very strong in the society. Here you see Osama bin Laden, the former leader of North Korea, all controlled by the Zionists. And more recently, if you want to read some of the gory details of some of the postings in Japan, most people in Japan are grateful for Israel's tremendous and unique help after the latest unprecedented disaster. But don't worry, there are also websites and blogs that blame the Jews for bringing this disaster upon them. And this is a Turkish website that is a takeoff from the old Nazi song. And mix and match by the Iranians. This is a Nazi site, supposedly non-political, but basically promoting Adolf Hitler as a hero. And then very briefly, my last point has to do with the whole issue of lone wolf. Since 9/11, especially those of us in the States, have been very worried that the Islamist modus operandi, their violence, their terrorism, would somehow inspire our local neo-Nazis and extremists, homegrown. That really has not happened. But in fact, something reverse did. The whole notion of lone wolf or leaderless resistance, which is not a new idea, but was incubated online for most of the last decade by extremists in the far, far right in the United States. And Alex Curtis was one. Act alone, do not rob banks, gives you specific things that you should be doing. The shooter of the Jewish day camp in Los Angeles some years ago was inspired by vigilantes of Christendom, actually invoking the image of Pinchas HaKohen as the legitimacy for people with the courage to act, and that's what motivated the shooter, whose original target actually was the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And here again, you have far-right extremists with a how-to, explosives, bomb-making, leaderless resistance, all right-wing. All of a sudden, about 2 years ago, we began to see a sort of mutation. And here you've got a 2010 presentation of a 13th century tshuva in Islam, a fatwa, that says that basically legitimizing the attack of the enemy ranks, doing it alone, and confident that it will be killed as a suicide bomber. More colloquially, confession of a human bomb from Palestine. And here we go to Al-Ansar Forum, and these are all pictures, most of them of recent individuals who launched attacks in the United States. The term used, lone wolf. Same thing with our would-be underpants bomber. And here is again a website in Arabic with the title of Lone Wolf, and honoring such great mass murderers as Major Nidal Malik Hassan, Richard Reed, etc. And I'll leave you with one last image from Inspire magazine, which is Al-Qaeda's online magazine. And it basically is not telling people in Yemen to get a Ford and make it into a suicide bombing machine, but to young people in English-speaking countries to take revenge for the millions of Muslims lost to American brutality. Finally, last winter, there was an attack in Montreal on a number of shuls. You may recall it was in early December. They never found the perpetrators. We were up there, the local police, never, it was during a strong snow. Interesting is that there was never any public discussion at all that the perpetrators may have been Arabic or Muslim. Never came up. And yet, we found a tremendous amount of chatter on Arab and Muslim sites about this hate crime. And I find this to be particularly disturbing. Called it a lie. Muslims are innocent regarding this burning of the synagogue and the school. Nobody ever accused them of doing it. And then all the way to Shabab, Palestine, Israel had it coming, soon in Tel Aviv, God is gracious, etc. Friends, for those of you who would like to download this presentation, you can go up online. If that's too long of something to get right, and I probably wouldn't get it right myself, you can just send me an email at acooper@wiesenthal.com, and I will send you the link. Thank you very much.